Welcome to Early River Civilizations. This is Melinda Klein. In the fertile river valleys, the Euphrates and Tigris in Mesopotamia, the Nile in Egypt, the Indus in India, and the Yellow River in China, intensive agriculture became capable of supporting large groups of people. In these regions, civilization was born. The first civilizations emerged in Western Asia, now known as the Middle East, and Egypt, where people developed the organized societies that we associated civilized living to be. Early cities did not always survive. The city-states that developed could not work out a system of government and regulation that would enable them to live in peace. As long as each power had its own laws, not shared laws and practices between groups, war was the likely result and still is. We are in this pattern today. This question of proper organization of the state has become the key question of urbanization. Mesopotamia is a Greek word that means land between the rivers, which today is within modern Iraq. Around 3,000 people of Mesopotamia developed canals to control and direct the violent and sudden floods caused by the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. This organization in an area surrounded by desert led to villages and then cities. Sumerians built reed huts from plants. They domesticated grains and wild donkeys and cattle to use as beasts of burden and for milk to make a kind of cheese. Horses and camels followed later. Their Sumerian ancestors date back to 5000 BC. However, they were not alone. By 2900, the Sumerians were joined in this lush land habitat by nomadic peoples, the Semites. Scribes were low-level administrators who made records on clay tablets and papyrus of taxes collected from peasants. Fathers wishing better lives for their sons paid to have them educated to work in the city. While the Epic of Gilgamesh is the best known of the Mesopotamian tales, it is one of the world's oldest surviving pieces of literature. The Code of Hammurabi, created around 1780 BC, is one of the earliest sets of laws found and one of the best preserved examples of this type of document from ancient Mesopotamia. The city-state was and is an independent urban political center that has control over resources such as land, water, and metal ore. With these resources, a civilization can survive, produce a surplus, and trade with their neighbors for the things they cannot produce. In 3000 BC, the term king emerged in Sumerian cities. Sumer was such a place. Egyptian religious mythology gives great prominence to the political unification of the country. The triumphs of Isis, Osiris, and their son Horus, three of Egypt's most important gods, over disorder and evil, represents in mythic terms the significance of the unification of Egypt. The city of the dead, the oldest, is Abydos, where kings were buried as early as 3100 BC, a 300-mile boat ride upriver from the capital city, Memphis. The Books of the Dead constituted a collection of spells, charms, passwords, numbers, and magical formula for the use of the deceased in the afterlife. The Nile has been a site of continuous human habitation. By about 6000 BC, organized agriculture and large building construction had appeared in the Nile Valley. During the Neolithic era, several pre-dynastic cultures developed independently in Upper and Lower Egypt. A unified kingdom was founded around 3150 BC by King Menes, giving rise to a series of dynasties that ruled Egypt for 3,000 years. Egyptian culture flourished during this long period and remained distinctly Egyptian in its religion, arts, language, and customs. Thanks to the French discovery in 1799 of the Rosetta Stone, hieroglyphics, Egyptian writing, could now be deciphered. Evolve in Egypt. There was a pharaoh at the top with the royal family, followed by administrators. Then in the middle there were priests and other officials, with artisans, wealthy peasants, and merchants. Then peasants who lived in rural villages, and the town laborers and slaves at the bottom. While foreigners were not welcome, they did emigrate and settle in Egypt from other places in the Mediterranean, Africa, and Asia. But little is known of the common people. In Egyptian art, much is learned about elite society, rituals, religion, and burial practices. Like people of the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia, Egyptians were polytheistic, which is the worship of many gods. Kings were often associated with the sun god, Osiris, and life-giving force and renewal of the life cycle. Egyptians, rich and poor, took their religion seriously by building temples through worship and cult practices to a variety of deities. Unlike for Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations and culture, we know much about these two groups due to their artifacts, architecture. However, this is not so for the Indus Valley, and their history was almost completely lost. The Indus Valley civilization was an ancient civilization thriving along the Indus River in what was British India since the 17th century. It is not clear to historians what motivated the people of the Indus Valley to urbanize. However, they had knowledge of a writing system and lived in an urban setting with dwellings close together. For this reason, we classify them as a civilization. Harappa was such a place. It was a circular city as compared with Sumer and Uruk and Memphis. However, Harappa, like other cities, had drain pipes to carry away waste, and the streets were ordered in a rectangular fashion. The Harappans of the Indus Valley were an agricultural people whose economy was almost entirely dominated by horticulture. The Harappans left writing in the form of seals, which have pictures of animals that imply a wet and marshy environment, such as rhinoceros, elephants, and tigers. Their cities were carefully planned and laid out. They are, in fact, the first people to plan the building of their cities. Whenever they rebuilt their cities, they laid them out precisely in the same way the destroyed city had been built. The pathways within the city are laid out in a perpendicular, crisscross fashion. Most of the city consisted of residences. Life in the Harappan cities was apparently quite good. Although living quarters were cramped, which is typical of ancient cities, the residents nevertheless had drains, sewers, and even latrines. We know nothing of the religion of Harappans. Unlike in Mesopotamia or Egypt, we have discovered no building that so much as hints that it might have been a temple or involved any kind of public worship. There is no question that they lived an active trade with cultures to the west. Several Harappan seals have been found in excavations of Sumerian cities.